Hi, I'm Isaac from the Mountain Takes. Everest doesn't care how many leadership seminars you've run or how many teams you've turned around, but one climber was sure it would make an exception for her. It didn't take long for the mountain to disagree. It was April 9th, 2019, Everest Base Camp, 17,600 feet. Everest kills in ways that have nothing to do with fitness. Above 26,000 feet lies the death zone, where the air holds barely a third of the oxygen found at sea level, where the body begins consuming itself just to keep the brain functioning. More than 300 people have died on this mountain since records began, and a disproportionate number of them died not from lack of skill, but from a decision made somewhere between Camp 2 and Camp 4, when judgment was already the first thing the altitude took. Dana Whitfield was 44 years old, a management consultant from Charlotte, North Carolina, who had spent 19 years telling companies how to restructure themselves around efficiency. She had summited Aconcagua and Denali in the 3 years prior, and she carried both climbs like credentials, the way she carried her firm's name on a business card. Her Instagram bio read, "Peak performance, on mountains and in the boardroom." She had trained for 14 months for Everest, a nutritionist, an altitude tent in her spare bedroom, a climbing coach twice a week. Nothing prepared her for this. What Dana had never done was defer. In 19 years of consulting, she had built a career on walking into rooms where she knew less than anyone else in them, and leaving with everyone doing what she said. She assumed the mountain worked the same way, that authority was a posture you took, not something the terrain itself decided to grant or withhold. Her guide was Pembbea Sherpa, 38, with 11 Everest summits behind him and 15 years guiding on the mountain. He was known at base camp for being quiet, meticulous, and almost unnervingly calm, the kind of guide other guides sent difficult clients to. He had 2 daughters in Kathmandu, and this season's contract was paying for their school fees 3 years running. He'd told his wife before he left that this would be his last big season. He wanted to be around for saving one more decision from becoming a mistake, and then be done. At base camp, the first friction surfaced during rotation planning. Pembbea recommended an extra day at Camp 2 for acclimatization, standard practice for a first-time 8,000-meter climber. Dana said her Denali summit meant she didn't need training wheels. Pembbea explained, gently, that Denali and Everest stressed the body in different ways, that the death zone above 8,000 meters had nothing comparable on Denali. Dana smiled and said she appreciated his caution, but she'd made her decision. Pembbea noted it and let it go. The narrator would tell you now, this was the first quiet withdrawal, though nobody at camp could have named it yet. By Camp 2, at 21,300 feet, the pattern had a shape. Dana had started second-guessing Pembbea's calls on pace, insisting they were moving too slowly through the western Qum, a valley climbers call the Valley of Silence, for the way sound seems to vanish into the surrounding walls of ice, and for how still the air goes on windless days. Pembbea flagged her SpO2 reading at 81%, low for the altitude, not dangerous yet, but a signal. Dana waved off the pulse oximeter. "I feel fine," she said. Pembbea wrote the number down anyway. At Camp 3, 23,600 feet, on the Lhotse face, an 1,800-foot wall of blue glacial ice, so steep that climbers fix ropes the entire way up it, because a single slip here has historically been fatal. Dana told Pembbea she wanted to skip the second rotation back down to Camp 2 that most climbers use to acclimatize before summit push. Pembbea explained the physiology as simply as he could. The body needs to touch altitude, retreat, and rebuild red blood cells before going higher, or the summit push becomes a race against a body that hasn't caught up. Dana told him she'd read the same articles he had, and that on Denali, she'd skipped a rotation and been fine. Pembbea said Denali tops out at just over 20,000 feet. Dana said she'd made her decision. The narrator flags it here plainly. She was arguing physiology with a man who had 11 summits, based on a mountain half this one's height. The institutional complicity arrived at Camp 2, 3 days before the summit push. Dana radioed the expedition company's base camp manager directly, bypassing Pembbea, to request a pace change and a different oxygen flow rate than Pembbea had set. The base camp manager, aware Dana's firm had paid a premium rate and had already left a 5-star review of the company mid-expedition, a rare, valuable thing for future bookings, approved her request without consulting Pembbea. Pembbea found out only when Dana told him herself, almost cheerfully. He said nothing that night, but the following morning he asked the base camp manager, quietly and once, to route all future changes through him first. The manager said he would. He didn't. The summit push began the night of May 22nd, from the South Col at 26,000 feet, in temperatures near -30 degrees Fahrenheit, with a route that funnels climbers through the balcony, the south summit, the Hillary Step, and then a final exposed ridge to the top, each section requiring hours of fixed rope traffic in single file, often in the dark, often in a queue. Above the South Col there is no real rescue. Above 26,000 feet, helicopters cannot safely operate, and a climber in trouble is, for practical purposes, dependent entirely on the people physically standing next to them. At the balcony, 27,600 feet, Dana's oxygen flow rate, set by her own request, not Pembbea's, was running lean, calibrated for a longer summit day than her actual pace was achieving. Pembbea noticed her gait had slowed, and her speech had thinned to short phrases. He suggested increasing her flow rate and turning back if it didn't improve within the hour. Dana told him, in a voice two other climbers on the rope behind her would later describe to investigators as flat but certain, that she hadn't spent 14 months training to turn around 800 feet from the top. Pembbea said the mountain would still be there next year. Dana said she wouldn't be back next year, and he was welcome to descend alone if he'd lost his nerve. This was the point of no return, and it did not look dramatic. There was no shouting on that ridge. Dana simply unclipped her second carabiner from the fixed line where Pembbea had asked her to double protect through an exposed section, looked at him, and clipped past him instead, taking the lead position on the rope for the first time all summit night. She said, "I don't need a babysitter above 8,000 meters. She said it once, and then, 20 minutes later, almost identically again, as if convincing herself. Pembbea followed her, but no longer led. Near the south summit, 28,700 feet, with dawn breaking pink over the Kangshung face, Dana told Pembbea she was releasing him from the summit push, that she'd radio down that he'd been let go for excessive caution, and that she'd finish the final 500 feet with the queue of climbers ahead of her instead. Pembbea radioed base camp immediately to report it. The manager told him company policy required him to stay with the client regardless of her instructions. Dana, overhearing the radio call on the shared channel, unclipped fully from Pembba's rope team and moved forward into the traffic line alone, telling two Indian climbers ahead of her that her guide had been reassigned. Sunita Rao, 34, a climber from Mumbai 2 positions ahead of Dana in the queue, would later tell investigators that Dana seemed lucid enough to speak in full sentences at that point, which was itself part of what made no one intervene. She didn't look confused, she looked determined. A second witness, Expedition Dr. Mark Feldman, stationed at the South Col, confirmed by radio log that Dana's oxygen mask readout, relayed by a nearby climber's radio, showed her tank pressure dropping faster than her flow rate setting should have allowed, suggesting either a regulator fault or a rate she'd altered again herself without telling anyone. At 8:40 a.m., near the base of the Hillary Step, at roughly 28,940 feet, Dana stopped moving in the queue. Climbers behind her assumed she was resting, as people often do in the traffic line at that altitude. It was 11 minutes before anyone realized she hadn't moved at all. Pembbea, descending from where he'd last seen her, reached her position at 9:52 a.m. Her SpO2, when he finally got a reading, showed 58%. Her lips had gone the dull blue-gray of cyanosis. She was unresponsive to voice and to a sternal rub. Pembbea administered supplemental oxygen at maximum flow and radioed for the closest available climbers to assist a carry-down, but above 28,000 feet a carry-down for an unresponsive adult is, in practical terms, nearly impossible. There is no evacuation above the death zone that doesn't risk the lives of everyone attempting it. 2 Sherpas from another team arrived to help within 20 minutes. Dana was pronounced dead at 11:15 a.m., later listed as high-altitude cerebral edema compounded by hypoxia, consistent with an oxygen flow rate insufficient for her actual exertion and altitude. They left a small trekking pole marker near where she was found, a quiet, unofficial custom on a mountain where full recovery is rarely possible. Pembbea carried her ice axe down himself and gave it to her sister at base camp 8 days later. He didn't say much when he handed it over. He didn't need to. Dana had spent 19 years being right about rooms full of people who didn't know as much as she did. Everest was the first room that didn't care.